Hi friends, I welcome you all here at TNV Academy. In this session, we are going to talk about an international standard, ISO 9001-2015 Quality Management Systems. In this session, we shall cover all the requirements of ISO 9001-2015 Quality Management Systems in detail. Let's discuss about the outcome of this session. After completing this session, you will be able to understand all the requirements of ISO 9001-2015 Quality Management Systems necessary to support the operations of the standard. Before discussing the standard, let me give you a brief idea about International Organization for Standardization, or ISO in short. ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, is a worldwide federation of national standards bodies, ISO member bodies. The work of preparing international standards is normally carried out through ISO technical committees, each member body interested in a subject for whom a technical committee has been established has the right to be represented on that committee. International organizations, governmental and non-governmental, in liaison with ISO, also take part in the work. ISO collaborates closely with the International Electrotechnical Commission, IEC, on all matters of electrotechnical standardization. Let's have a short introduction of ISO 9001-2015 Quality Management System. ISO 9001 is defined as the international standard that specifies requirements for a quality management system, QMS. Organizations use the standard to demonstrate the ability to consistently provide products and services that meet customer and regulatory requirements. It is the most popular standard in the ISO 9000 series and the only standard in the series to which organizations can certify. It outlines a framework for improving quality and a vocabulary of understanding for any organization looking to provide products and services that consistently meet the requirements and expectations of customers and other relevant interested parties in the most efficient manner possible. The QMS is the aggregate of all the processes, resources, assets, and cultural values that support the goal of customer satisfaction and organizational efficiency. This standard was first published in year 1987 by the International Organization for Standardization, ISO. The current version of ISO 9001 was released in September 2015. ISO 9001-2015 applies to any organization, regardless of size or industry. More than 1 million organizations from more than 160 countries have applied the ISO 9001 standard requirements to their quality management system. Organizations of all types and sizes find that using the ISO 9001 standard helps them organizing processes, improving the efficiency of processes, and continually improving. ISO 9001-2015 doesn't dictate what an organization's objectives should be or how to achieve them. In other words, it doesn't tell anyone how to run their business. It's a flexible standard that allows each organization to define for itself what its objectives and adherence to the standard ought to be. ISO 9001-2015 defines the guiding principles that can be used to create efficiencies by aligning and streamlining processes throughout the organization in an effort to bring down costs, create new opportunities, meet regulatory requirements, and help organizations expand into new markets in which clients demand ISO 9001 certification. Let's discuss the quality management principles now. As the standard document, ISO 9001 is based on the quality management principles described in ISO 9000. The description includes a statement of each principle, a rationale of why the principle is important for the organization, some examples of benefits associated with the principle, and examples of typical actions to improve the organization's performance when applying the principle. The quality management principles are customer focus, leadership, engagement of people, process approach, improvement, evidence-based decision making, and relationship management. These principles are the strategic basis for all decisions relating to quality management in the organization and are infused within all aspects of the ISO 9001-2015 language. Every organization will prioritize each principle in a different way at various stages of their development. ISO 9001-2015 contains a subset of tactical elements that complement the strategic principles provided above. These 5 elements, which represent a significant advance on ISO 9001-2008, are the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle, risk-based thinking, leadership participation, unified structure, and clarified documentation requirements. These elements are complementary and are highly integrated into ISO 9001-2015. As such, discussing them in isolation from one another is somewhat artificial and carries the danger of misrepresenting the organic quality of the standard. Coming to the quality management process approach. As per standard document, ISO 9001 promotes the adoption of a process approach when developing, implementing, and improving the effectiveness of a quality management system to enhance customer satisfaction by meeting customer requirements. Specific requirements considered essential to the adoption of the process approach are included in Subclause 4.4 of the standard. The application of the process approach in a quality management system enables understanding and consistency in meeting requirements, the consideration of processes in terms of added value, the achievement of effective process performance, improvement of processes based on evaluation of data and information. Figure 1 on screen gives a schematic representation of any process and shows the interaction of its elements. The monitoring and measuring checkpoints, which are necessary for control, are specific to each process and will vary depending on the related risks. Let's discuss about Plan, Do, Check, Act (Pdca) cycle. Plan, Do, Check, Act (Pdca) is a process approach that manages processes and systems to create a cycle of continuous improvement. It considers the QMS as an entire system and provides systematic management of the QMS from planning and implementation through to checks and improvement. Pdca helps organizations achieve better customer satisfaction and consequently higher levels of customer confidence in an organization's abilities to meet customer requirements. The Pdca cycle can be applied to all processes and to the quality management system as a whole. Figure 2 illustrates how clauses 4 to 10 can be grouped in relation to the Pdca cycle. The Pdca cycle can be briefly described as plan, establish the objectives of the system and its processes and the resources needed to deliver results in accordance with customers' requirements and the organization's policies, and identify and address risks and opportunities. Do, implement what was planned. Check, monitor, and where applicable, measure processes and the resulting products and services against policies, objectives, requirements, and planned activities and report the results. Act, take actions to improve performance as necessary. Figure 2. Representation of the structure of this international standard in the Pdca cycle. Let's have an idea about risk-based thinking. According to the ISO 9001, the risk-based thinking is essential for achieving an effective quality management system. The concept of risk-based thinking has been implicit in previous editions of this international standard, including, for example, carrying out preventive action to eliminate potential non-conformities, analyzing any non-conformity that do occur, and taking action to prevent recurrence that is appropriate for the effects of the non-conformity. The standard says that to conform to the requirements of this international standard, an organization needs to plan and implement actions to address risks and opportunities. Addressing both risks and opportunities establishes a basis for increasing the effectiveness of the quality management system, achieving improved results, and preventing negative effects. ISO 9001 specifies that opportunities can arise as a result of a situation favorable to achieving an intended result. For example, a set of circumstances that allow the organization to attract customers, develop new products and services, reduce waste, or improve productivity. Actions to address opportunities can also include consideration of associated risks. Risk is the effect of uncertainty, and any such uncertainty can have positive or negative effects. A positive deviation arising from a risk can provide an opportunity, but not all positive effects of risk result in opportunities. Coming to the compatibility part now, I'm going to explain relationship of ISO 9001-2015 with other management system standards. ISO 9001-2015 applies the framework developed by ISO to improve alignment among its international standards for management systems. You can see on screen a table which shows the relationship between other international standards on quality management and quality management systems and the clauses of this international standard. This international standard enables an organization to use the process approach, coupled with the Pdca Cycle and risk-based thinking, to align or integrate its quality management system with the requirements of other management system standards. ISO 9001 does not include requirements specific to other management systems, such as those for environmental management, occupational health and safety management, or financial management. Sector-specific quality management system standards based on the requirements of this international standard have been developed for a number of sectors. Some of these sectors specify additional quality management system requirements, while others are limited to providing guidance to the application of this international standard within the particular sector. Friends, this was fundamental information about the standard. Now let me start with the requirements of ISO 9001-2015 Quality Management Systems. We shall cover the 10 sections of the standard in this section. These sections are scope, normative references, terms and definitions, context of the organization, leadership, planning, support, operation, performance evaluation, and improvement. Let's start with the scope. This international standard specifies requirements for a quality management system, or QMS in short. When an organization needs to demonstrate its ability to consistently provide products and services that meet customer and applicable statutory and regulatory requirements. ISO 9001 also specifies requirements for a quality management system when an organization aims to enhance customer satisfaction through the effective application of the system, including processes for improvement of the system and the assurance of conformity to customer and applicable statutory and regulatory requirements. Scope of the standard states that all the requirements of this international standard are generic and are intended to be applicable to any organization, regardless of its type or size or the products and services it provides. Scope says as note 1 that the terms product or service only apply to products and services intended for or required by a customer in this standard. Under note 2, standard states that statutory and regulatory requirements can be expressed as legal requirements. Coming to section 2 of standard, that is normative references, the standard under this section specifies that the document in whole or in part is normatively referenced and is indispensable for its application. For dated references, only the edition cited applies, and for undated references, the latest edition of the referenced document applies, including amendments, if any. Coming to the Section 3, Terms and Definitions. The standard under Section 3 states that the terms and definitions given in ISO 9000-2015 apply for the purposes of the standard, that is, 9001-2015. We shall discuss those terms and definitions now, which are given in ISO 9000-2015. Let's start with the terms related to person or people. Top management. Top management is a person or group of people who directs and controls an organization at the highest level. For example, director, proprietor, founder, etc. Top management has the power to delegate authority and provide resources within the organization. If the scope of the management system covers only part of an organization, then top management refers to those who direct and control the part of that organization. Quality Management System Consultant, QMS consultant, is a person who assists the organization on quality management system realization, giving advice or information. The quality management system consultant can also assist in realizing parts of a quality management system. ISO 10019-2005 also provides guidance on how to distinguish a competent quality management system consultant from one who is not competent. Involvement. Involvement is basically taking part in an activity, event, or situation. Engagement. Engagement is involvement in and contribution to activities to achieve shared objectives. Configuration authority or configuration control board or dispositioning authority. Configuration authority is a person or a group of persons with assigned responsibilities and authority to make decisions on the configuration. Relevant interested parties within and outside the organization should be represented on the configuration authority. Dispute resolver. Dispute resolver is an individual person assigned by a dispute resolution process or DRP provider. Dispute provider is to assist the parties in resolving a dispute. For example, staff, volunteers, contract personnel. Now coming to the terms related to organization. Organization. So organization is a person or group of people that has its own functions with responsibilities, authorities, and relationships to achieve its objectives. The concept of organization includes, but is not limited to, sole trader, company, corporation, firm, enterprise, authority, partnership, association, charity or institution, or part or combination thereof, whether incorporated or not, public or private. Context of the organization. Context of the organization is a combination of internal and external issues that can have an effect on an organization's approach to developing and achieving its objectives. The organization's objectives can be related to its product and services, investments, and behavior towards its interested parties. The concept of context of the organization is equally applicable to not-for-profit or public service organizations as it is to those seeking profits. In English, this concept is often referred to by other terms such as business environment, organizational environment, or ecosystem of an organization. Interested party or stakeholder. Interested party or stakeholder is a person or organization that can affect, be affected by, or perceive itself to be affected by a decision or activity. For example, customers, owners, people in an organization, providers, bankers, regulators, unions, partners, or society that can include competitors or opposing pressure groups. Customer. Customer is a person or organization that could or does receive a product or a service that is intended for or required by this person or organization. For example, consumer, client, end user, retailer, receiver of product or service from an internal process, beneficiary, and purchaser. A customer can be internal or external to the organization. Provider or supplier. Provider or supplier is an organization that provides a product or a service. Examples of providers are producer, distributor, retailer, or vendor, etc. A provider can be internal or external to the organization. In a contractual situation, a provider is sometimes called contractor. External provider or external supplier. External provider or external supplier is a provider that is not a part of the organization. For example, a producer, distributor, retailer, or vendor of a product or a service. DRP provider or dispute resolution process provider. DRP provider is a person or organization that supplies and operates an external dispute resolution process. Generally, a DRP provider is a legal entity, separate from the organization or person as an individual, and the complainant. In this way, the attributes of independence and fairness are emphasized. In some situations, a separate unit is established within the organization to handle unresolved complaints. The DRP provider contracts with the parties to provide dispute resolution and is accountable for performance. The DRP provider supplies dispute resolvers. The DRP provider also utilizes support, executive and other managerial staff to supply financial resources, clerical support, scheduling assistance, training, meeting rooms, supervision, and similar functions. DRP providers can take many forms, including not-for-profit, for-profit, and public entities. An association can also be a DRP provider. In ISO 10003-2007, instead of the term DRP provider, the term provider is used. Association. Association is an organization consisting of member organizations or persons. Metrological function. Metrological function is a functional unit with administrative and technical responsibility for defining and implementing the measurement management system. Terms related to activity. Improvement. Improvement is activity to enhance performance. The activity can be recurring or singular. Continual improvement. Continual improvement is recurring activity to enhance performance. The process of establishing objectives and finding opportunities for improvement is a continual process through the use of audit findings and audit conclusions, analysis of data, management reviews, or other means, and generally leads to corrective action or preventive action. Management is a coordinated activities to direct and control an organization. Management can include establishing policies and objectives and processes to achieve these objectives. The word management sometimes refers to people, that is, a person or group of people with authority and responsibility for the conduct and control of an organization. Quality management. Quality management is basically management with regard to quality. Quality management can include establishing quality policies and quality objectives and processes to achieve these quality objectives through quality planning, quality assurance, quality control, and quality improvement. Quality planning. Quality planning is a part of quality management focused on setting quality objectives and specifying necessary operational processes and related resources to achieve the quality objectives. Establishing quality plans can be part of quality planning. Quality assurance. Quality assurance is a part of quality management focused on providing confidence that quality requirements will be fulfilled. Quality control. Quality control is a part of quality management focused on fulfilling quality requirements. Quality improvement. Quality improvement is a part of quality management focused on increasing the ability to fulfill the quality requirements. The quality requirements can be related to any aspect such as effectiveness, efficiency, or traceability. Configuration management. Configuration management is coordinated activities to direct and control configuration. Configuration management generally concentrates on technical and organizational activities that establish and maintain control of a product or service and its product configuration information throughout the life cycle of the product. Change control. Change control is a set of activities for control of the output after formal approval of its product configuration information. Activity. Activity is smallest identified object of work in a project. Project management. Project management is planning, organizing, monitoring, controlling, and reporting of all aspects of a project and the motivation of all those involved in it to achieve the project objectives. Configuration object. Configuration object is an object within a configuration that satisfies an end user function. Let's talk about the terms related to process. Process is a set of interrelated or interacting activities that use inputs to deliver an intended result. Whether the intended result of a process is called output, product, or service depends on the context of the reference. Inputs to a process are generally the outputs of other processes, and outputs of a process are generally the inputs to other processes. Two or more interrelated and interacting processes in series can also be referred to as a process. Processes in an organization are generally planned and carried out under controlled conditions to add value. A process where the conformity of the resulting output cannot be readily or economically validated is frequently referred to as a special process. Project. Project is a unique process consisting of a set of coordinated and controlled activities with start and finish dates undertaken to achieve an objective, conforming to specific requirements, including the constraints of time, cost, and resources. Quality Management System Realization. Quality Management System Realization is a set of establishing, documenting, implementing, maintaining, and continually improving a quality management system. Competence Acquisition. Competence acquisition is a process of attaining competence. Procedure. Procedure is a specified way to carry out an activity or a process. Outsource. Outsource means making an arrangement where an external organization performs part of an organization's function or process. An external organization is outside the scope of the management system, although the outsourced function or process is within the scope. Contract. Contract means binding agreement. Design and development. Design and development is a set of processes that transform requirements for an object into more detailed requirements for that object. Let's discuss terms related to system. System. So, system is a set of interrelated or interacting elements. Infrastructure. Infrastructure is a system of facilities, equipment, and services needed for the operation of an organization. Management system. Management system is a set of interrelated or interacting elements of an organization to establish policies and objectives and processes to achieve those objectives. A management system can address a single discipline or several disciplines. Example, quality management, financial management, or environmental management. The management system elements establish the organization's structure, roles and responsibilities, planning, operation, policies, practices, rules, beliefs, objectives, and processes to achieve those objectives. The scope of a management system can include the whole of the organization, specific and identified functions of the organization, specific and identified sections of the organization, or one or more functions across a group of organizations. Quality management system. Quality management system is a part of management system with regards to quality. Work environment. Work environment is a set of conditions under which work is performed. Conditions can include physical, social, psychological, and environmental factors such as temperature, lighting, recognition schemes, occupational stress, ergonomics, and atmospheric composition. Metrological confirmation. Metrological confirmation is a set of operations required to ensure that measuring equipment conforms to the requirements for its intended use. Metrological confirmation generally includes calibration or verification, any necessary adjustment or repair, and subsequent recalibration, comparison with the metrological requirements for the intended use of the equipment, as well as any required sealing and labeling. Metrological confirmation is not achieved until and unless the fitness of the measuring equipment for the intended use has been demonstrated and documented. The requirements for intended use include such considerations as range, resolution, and maximum permissible errors. Metrological requirements are usually distinct from and are not specified in Product 3.7.6 requirements. Measurement Management System. Measurement Management System is a set of interrelated or interacting elements necessary to achieve metrological confirmation and control of measurement processes. Policy. Policy is intentions and direction of an organization as formally expressed by its top management. Quality policy. Quality policy is a policy related to quality. Generally, the quality policy is consistent with the overall policy of the organization, can be aligned with the organization's vision and mission, and provides a framework for the setting of quality objectives. Quality management principles presented in this international standard can form a basis for the establishment of a quality policy. Vision. Vision is an aspiration of what an organization would like to become as expressed by top management. Mission. Mission is organization's purpose for existing as expressed by top management. Strategy. Strategy means plan to achieve a long-term or overall objective. Let's talk now about the terms related to requirement. Object, entity, or item. It means anything perceivable or conceivable. For example, product, service, process, person, organization, system, resource. Objects can be material, example, an engine, a sheet of paper, a diamond. Non-material, example, conversion ratio, a project plan. Or imagined, example, the future state of the organization. Quality. Quality means degree to which a set of inherent characteristics of an object fulfills requirements. The term quality can be used with adjectives such as poor, good, or excellent. Grade. Grade means category or rank given to different requirements for an object having the same functional use. For example, class of airline ticket and category of hotel in a hotel brochure. When establishing a quality requirement, the grade is generally specified. Requirement. Requirement means need or expectation that is stated, generally implied or obligatory. Generally implied means that it is custom or common practice for the organization and interested parties that the need or expectation under consideration is implied. A specified requirement is one that is stated, for example, in documented information. A qualifier can be used to denote a specific type of requirement, example, product requirement, quality management requirement, customer requirement, quality requirement. Requirements can be generated by different interested parties or by the organization itself. It can be necessary for achieving high customer satisfaction to fulfill an expectation of a customer, even if it is neither stated nor generally implied or obligatory. Quality requirement. Quality requirement is a requirement related to quality. Statutory requirement. Statutory requirement is an obligatory requirement specified by a legislative body. Regulatory requirement. Regulatory requirement is an obligatory requirement specified by an authority mandated by a legislative body. Product configuration information. Product configuration information is requirement or other information for product design, realization, verification, operation, and support. Non-conformity. Non-conformity is non-fulfillment of a requirement. Defect. Defect is non-conformity related to an intended or specified use. The distinction between the concepts defect and non-conformity is important as it has legal connotations, particularly those associated with product and service liability issues. The intended use as intended by the customer can be affected by the nature of the information, such as operating or maintenance instructions. The intended use as intended by the customer can be affected by the nature of the information, such as operating or maintenance instructions provided by the provider. Conformity. Conformity is fulfillment of a requirement. Capability. Capability is an ability of an object to realize an output that will fulfill the requirements for that output. Traceability. Traceability is an ability to trace the history, application, or location of an object. When considering a product or a service, traceability can relate to the origin of materials and parts, the processing history, the distribution and location of the product or service after delivery. Dependability. Dependability is an ability to perform as and when required. Innovation. Innovation means new or changed object realizing or redistributing value. Innovation is generally significant in its effect. Coming to the terms related to results. Objective. Objective is the result to be achieved. An objective can be strategic, tactical, or operational. Objectives can relate to different disciplines such as financial, health, safety, and environmental objectives, and can apply at different levels such as strategic, organization, wide, project, product, and process. An objective can be expressed in other ways. Example, as an intended outcome, a purpose, an operational criterion, as a quality objective, or by the use of other words with similar meaning. Example, aim, goal, or target. In the context of quality management systems, quality objectives are set by the organization, consistent with the quality policy, to achieve specific results. Quality objective. Quality objective is an objective related to quality. Quality objectives are generally based on the organization's quality policy. Quality objectives are generally specified for relevant functions, levels, and processes in the organization. Success. Success is basically achievement of an objective. The success of an organization emphasizes the need for a balance between its economic or financial interests and the needs of its interested parties, such as customers, users, investors, shareholders, owners, people in the organization, providers, partners, interest groups, and communities. Sustained success. Sustained success is success over a period of time. Sustained success emphasizes the need for a balance between economic, financial interests of an organization and those of the social and ecological environment. Sustained success relates to the interested parties of an organization, such as customers, owners, people in an organization, providers, bankers, unions, partners, or society. Output. Output is the result of a process. Whether an output of the organization is a product or a service depends on the preponderance of the characteristics involved. Example, a painting for sale in a gallery is a product, whereas supply of a commissioned painting is a service. A hamburger bought in a retail store is a product, whereas receiving an order and serving a hamburger ordered in a restaurant is part of a service. Product. Product is the output of an organization that can be produced without any transaction taking place between the organization and the customer. Production of a product is achieved without any transaction necessarily taking place between a provider and the customer, but can often involve this service element upon its delivery to the customer. The dominant element of a product is that it is generally tangible. Hardware is tangible, and its amount is a countable characteristic. Example, tires. Processed materials are tangible and their amount is a continuous characteristic. Example, fuel and soft drinks. Hardware and processed materials are often referred to as goods. Software consists of information regardless of delivery medium. Example, computer program, mobile phone app, instruction manual, dictionary content, musical composition, copyright, driver's license. Service. Service is the output of an organization with at least one activity necessarily performed between the organization and the customer. The dominant elements of a service are generally intangible. Service often involves activities at the interface with the customer to establish customer requirements as well as upon delivery of the service, and can involve a continuing relationship such as banks, accountancies, or public organizations. Example, schools or hospitals. Provision of a service can involve, for example, an activity performed on a customer supplied tangible product. Example, a car to be repaired. An activity performed on a customer supplied intangible product. Example, the income statement needed to prepare a tax return. The delivery of an intangible product. Example, the delivery of the information in the context of knowledge transmission. The creation of ambience for the customer. Example, in hotels and restaurants. A service is generally experienced by the customer. Performance. Performance is measurable result. Performance can relate to either to quantitative or qualitative findings. Performance can relate to the management of activities, processes, products, services, systems, or organizations. Risk. Risk as an effect of uncertainty. An effect is a deviation from the expected. It could be positive or negative. Uncertainty is the state, even partial, of deficiency of information related to understanding or knowledge of an event, its consequence, or likelihood. Risk is often characterized by reference to potential events as defined in ISO Guide 73 2009 3.5.1.3 and consequences as defined in ISO Guide 73 2009 3.6.1.3 or a combination of these. Risk is often expressed in terms of a combination of the consequences of an event, including changes in circumstances, and the associated likelihood, as defined in ISO Guide 73 2009 3.6.1.1 of occurrence. The word risk is sometimes used when there is the possibility of only negative consequences. Efficiency. Efficiency is the relationship between the result achieved and the resources used. Effectiveness. Effectiveness is an extent to which planned activities are realized and planned results are achieved. Let's discuss the terms related to data, information, and document. Data. Data are facts about an object. Information. Information means meaningful data. Objective evidence. Objective evidence is a data supporting the existence of verity of something. Objective evidence can be obtained through observation, measurement, test, or by other means. Objective evidence for the purpose of audit generally consists of records, statements of facts, or other information which are relevant to the audit criteria and verifiable. Information system. Information system is a network of communication channels used within an organization. Document. Document means information and the medium on which it is contained. For example, record, specification, procedure document, drawing, report, and standard, etc. The medium can be paper, magnetic, electronic, or optical computer disk, photograph, or master sample, or combination thereof. A set of documents, for example, specifications and records, is frequently called documentation. Some requirements, example, the requirement to be readable, relate to all types of documents. However, there can be different requirements for specifications. Example, the requirement to be revision controlled, and for records. Example, the requirement to be retrievable. Documented information. Documented information is an information required to be controlled and maintained by an organization and the medium on which it is contained. Documented information can be in any format and media and from any source. Documented information can refer to the management system, including related processes, information created in order for the organization to operate, documentation, evidence of results achieved. Specification. Specification means documents stating requirements. For example, quality, manual, quality plan, technical drawing, procedure document, work instructions. A specification can be related to activities, example, procedure document, process specification, and test, or products, example, product specification, performance specification, and drawing. It can be that by stating requirements, a specification additionally is stated results achieved by design and development, and thus, in some cases, can be used as a record. Quality manual. Quality manual is a specification for the quality management system of an organization. Quality manuals can vary in detail and format to suit the size and complexity of an individual organization. Quality plan. Quality plan is specification of the procedures and associated resources to be applied when and by whom to a specific object. These procedures generally include those referring to quality management processes and to product and service realization processes. A quality plan often makes reference to parts of the quality manual or to procedure documents. A quality plan is generally one of the results of quality planning. Record. Record is a document stating results achieved or providing evidence of activities performed. Records can be used, for example, to formalize traceability and to provide evidence of verification, preventive action, and corrective action. Generally, records need not be under revision control. Project management plan. Project management plan is a document specifying what is necessary to meet the objectives of the project. A project management plan should include or refer to the project's quality plan. The project management plan also includes or references such other plans as those relating to organizational structures, resources, schedule, budget, risk management, environmental management, health and safety management, and security management as appropriate. Verification. Verification is basically confirmation through the provision of objective evidence that specified requirements have been fulfilled. The objective evidence needed for a verification can be the result of an inspection or of other forms of determination, such as performing alternative calculations or reviewing documents. The activities carried out for verification are sometimes called a qualification process. The word verified is used to designate the corresponding status. Validation. Validation is actually confirmation through the provision of objective evidence that the requirements for a specific intended use or application have been fulfilled. The objective evidence needed for a validation is the result of a test or other form of determination, such as performing alternative calculations or reviewing documents. The word validated is used to designate the corresponding status. The use conditions for validation can be real or simulated. Configuration status accounting. Configuration status accounting is formalized recording and reporting of product configuration information. 3.6.8. The status of proposed changes and the status of the implementation of approved changes. Specific case. Specific case is a subject of the quality plan. This term is used to avoid repetition of process, product, project, or contract within ISO 10005. Let's talk about the terms related to customers. Feedback. Feedback is opinions, comments, and expressions of interest in a product, a service, or a complaints handling process. Customer satisfaction. Customer satisfaction is customers' perception of the degree to which the customer's expectations have been fulfilled. It can be that the customer's expectation is not known to the organization or even to the customer in question until the product or service is delivered. It can be necessary for achieving high customer satisfaction to fulfill an expectation of a customer, even if it is neither stated nor generally implied or obligatory. Complaints are a common indicator of low customer satisfaction, but their absence does not necessarily imply high customer satisfaction. Even when customer requirements have been agreed with the customer and fulfilled, this does not necessarily ensure high customer satisfaction. Complaint. Complaint is an expression of dissatisfaction made to an organization related to its product or service or the complaints handling process itself, where a response or resolution is explicitly or implicitly expected. Customer service. Customer service is basically interaction of the organization with the customer throughout the life cycle of a product or a service. Customer satisfaction code of conduct. Customer satisfaction code of conduct are promises made to the customers by an organization concerning its behavior that are aimed at enhanced customer satisfaction. 3.9.2 and related provisions. Related provisions can include objectives, conditions, limitations, contact information, and complaints, handling procedures. In ISO 10001-2007, the term code is used instead of customer satisfaction code of conduct. Dispute. Dispute is disagreement arising from a complaint submitted to a DRP provider. Some organizations allow their customers to express their dissatisfaction to a DRP provider in the first instance. In this situation, the expression of dissatisfaction becomes a complaint when sent to the organization for a response and becomes a dispute if not resolved by the organization without DRP provider intervention. Many organizations prefer their customers to first express any dissatisfaction to the organization before utilizing dispute resolution external to the organization. Coming to the terms related to characteristic. Characteristic. Characteristic is basically a distinguishing feature. A characteristic can be inherent or assigned. A characteristic can be qualitative or quantitative. There are various classes of characteristics, such as the following. Physical, example mechanical, electrical, chemical, or biological characteristics. Sensory, example related to smell, touch, taste, sight, hearing. Behavioral, example courtesy, honesty, veracity. Temporal, example punctuality, reliability, availability, continuity. Ergonomic, physiological, characteristic or related to human safety. Functional, example maximum speed of an aircraft. Quality characteristic. Quality characteristic is inherent characteristic of an object related to a requirement. Inherent means existing in something, especially as a permanent characteristic. A characteristic assigned to an object, example the price of an object, is not a quality characteristic of that object. Human factor. Human factor is characteristic of a person having an impact on an object under consideration. Characteristics can be physical, cognitive, or social. Human factors can have a significant impact on a management system. Competence. Competence is an ability to apply knowledge and skills to achieve intended results. Demonstrated competence is sometimes referred to as qualification. Metrological characteristic. Metrological characteristic is a characteristic which can influence the results of measurement. Measuring equipment usually has several metrological characteristics. Metrological characteristics can be the subject of calibration. Configuration. Configuration is interrelated functional and physical characteristics of a product or service defined in product configuration information. Configuration baseline. Configuration baseline is approved product configuration information that establishes the characteristics of a product or service at a point in time that serves as reference for activities throughout the life cycle of the product or service. Let's discuss the terms related to determination. Determination. Determination is an activity to find out one or more characteristics and their characteristic values. Review. Review is determination of the suitability, adequacy, or effectiveness of an object to achieve established objectives. For example, management review, design and development review, review of customer requirements, review of corrective action, and peer review. Review can also include the determination of efficiency. Monitoring. Monitoring is determining the status of a system, a process, a product, a service, or an activity. For the determination of the status, there can be a need to check, supervise, or critically observe. Monitoring is generally a determination of the status of an object carried out at different stages or at different times. Measurement. Measurement is a process to determine a value. According to ISO 35342, the value determined is generally the value of a quantity. Measurement process. Measurement process set of operations to determine the value of a quantity. Measuring equipment. Measuring equipment is measuring instrument, software, measurement standard, reference material, or auxiliary apparatus, or combination thereof necessary to realize a measurement process. Inspection. Inspection is determination of conformity to specified requirements. If the result of an inspection shows conformity, it can be used for purposes of verification. The result of an inspection can show conformity or non-conformity or a degree of conformity. Test. Test is determination according to requirements for a specific intended use or application. If the result of a test shows conformity, it can be used for purposes of validation. Progress evaluation. Progress evaluation is assessment of progress made on achievement of the project objectives. This assessment should be carried out at appropriate points in the project file lifecycle across project processes, based on criteria for project processes and product or service. The results of progress evaluations can lead to revision of the project management plan. Coming to the terms related to action. Preventive action. Preventive action is an action to eliminate the cause of a potential non-conformity or other potential undesirable situations. There can be more than one cause for a potential non-conformity. Preventive action is taken to prevent occurrence, whereas corrective action is taken to prevent recurrence. Corrective action. Corrective action is an action to eliminate the cause of a non-conformity and to prevent recurrence. There can be more than one cause for a non-conformity. Corrective action is taken to prevent recurrence, whereas preventive action is taken to prevent occurrence. Correction. Correction is an action to eliminate a detected non-conformity. A correction can be made in advance of, in conjunction with, or after a corrective action. A correction can be, for example, rework or regrade. Regrade. Regrade is alteration of the grade of a non-conforming product or service in order to make it conform to requirements differing from the initial requirements. Concession. Concession is permission to use or release a product or service that does not conform to specified requirements. A concession is generally limited to the delivery of products and services that have non-conforming characteristics within specified limits and is generally given for a limited quantity of products and services or period of time and for a specific use. Deviation permit. Deviation permit is permission to depart from the originally specified requirements of a product or service prior to its realization. A deviation permit is generally given for a limited quantity of products and services or period of time and for a specific use. Release. Release is permission to proceed to the next stage of a process or the next process. In English, in the context of software and documents, the word release is frequently used to refer to a version of the software or the document itself. Rework. Rework is an action on a non-conforming product or service to make it conform to the requirements. Rework can affect or change parts of the non-conforming product or service. Repair. Repair is an action on a non-conforming product or service to make it acceptable for the intended use. A successful repair of a non-conforming product or service does not necessarily make the product or service conform to the requirements. It can be that in conjunction with the repair, a concession is required. Repair includes remedial action taken on a previously conforming product or service to restore it for use. For example, as part of maintenance. Repair can affect or change parts of the non-conforming product or service. Scrap. Scrap is an action on a non-conforming product or service to preclude its originally intended use. For example, recycling, destruction. In a non-conforming service situation, use is precluded by discontinuing the service. Let's talk about the terms related to audit. Audit. Audit is a systematic, independent, and documented process for obtaining objective evidence and evaluating it objectively to determine the extent to which the audit criteria are fulfilled. The fundamental elements of an audit include the determination of the conformity of an object according to a procedure carried out by personnel not being responsible for the object audited. An audit can be an internal audit, first party, or an external audit, second party, or third party, and it can be a combined audit or a joint audit. Internal audits, sometimes called first party audits, are conducted by or on behalf of the organization itself for management review and other internal purposes and can form the basis of an organization's declaration of conformity. Independence can be demonstrated by the freedom from responsibility for the activity being audited. External audits include those generally called second and third party audits. Second party audits are conducted by parties having an interest in the organization, such as customers or by other persons on their behalf. Third party audits. Third party audits are conducted by external independent auditing organizations such as those providing certification, registration of conformity, or governmental agencies. This constitutes one of the common terms and core definitions for ISO management system standards given in Annex SL of the consolidated ISO supplement to the ISO IEC directives, Part 1. The original definition and notes to entry have been modified to remove effect of circulatory between audit criteria and audit evidence term entries, and notes 3 and 4 to entry have been added. Combined audit. Combined audit is an audit carried out together at a single auditee on two or more management systems. The parts of a management system that can be involved in a combined audit can be identified by the relevant management system standards, product standards, service standards, or process standards being applied by the organization. Joint audit. Joint audit is an audit carried out at a single auditee by two or more auditing organizations. Audit program. Audit program is set of one or more audits planned for a specific time frame and directed towards a specific purpose. Audit scope. Audit scope is extent and boundaries of an audit. The audit scope generally includes a description of the physical locations, organizational units, activities, and processes. Audit plan. Audit plan is description of the activities and arrangements for an audit. Audit criteria, set of policies 3.5.8, procedures 3.4.5, or requirements 3.6.4, used as a reference against which objective evidence 3.8.3 is compared. Audit evidence. Audit evidence are records, statements of facts, or other information which are relevant to the audit criteria. 3.13.7 and verifiable. Audit findings. Audit findings are results of the evaluation of the collected audit evidence against audit criteria. Audit findings indicate conformity or non-conformity. Audit findings can lead to the identification of opportunities for improvement or recording good practices. In English, if the audit criteria are selected from statutory requirements or regulatory requirements, the audit finding can be called compliance or non-compliance. Audit conclusion. Audit conclusion is the outcome of an audit after consideration of the audit objectives and all audit findings. Audit client. Audit client is organization or person requesting an audit. Auditee. Auditee is an organization being audited. Guide. Guide is a person appointed by the auditee to assist the audit team. Audit team. Audit team is one or more persons conducting an audit, supported if needed by technical experts. One auditor of the audit team is appointed as the audit team leader. The audit team can include auditors in training. Auditor. Auditor is a person who conducts an audit. Technical expert. Technical expert is a person who provides specific knowledge or expertise to the audit team. Specific knowledge or expertise relates to the organization, the process or activity to be audited, or language or culture. A technical expert does not act as an auditor in the audit team. Observer. Observer is a person who accompanies the audit team but does not act as an auditor. An observer can be a member of the auditee, a regulator, or other interested parties who witness the audit. So friends, till now it was all about the section 3, terms and definitions of ISO 9001-2015. Now we shall start with the section 4, context of the organization. When an organization is implementing its QMS, the first step for ISO 9001 requirements is to thoughtfully align business objectives and intent with the QMS. This process is titled as context of the organization. The context includes defining influences of various factors on the organization and how they impact the QMS, the culture of the company, objectives and goals, complexity of products, the flow of processes and information. It also requires a reflection of the size of the organization, its markets, and how they define the customers and other interested parties. It also uses the context as a way to detect risks and opportunities and how it affects the QMS. As per ISO 9000, the definition of context of the organization is business environment, a combination of internal and external factors and conditions. These factors and conditions that can have an effect on an organization's approach to its products, services, and investments and interested parties. The note states that this concept of context of organization is equally applicable to not-for-profit organizations, public service organizations, and governmental organizations. Also, in normal language, this concept is also known as the business environment organizational environment or ecosystem of an organization. The dynamics of the operating environment for organizations has changed a lot over the years with new technological advances, the rise of social media, environmental concerns, and the influence of many such political, social, economic, legal, financial, regulatory, and cultural factors. Similarly, internal factors such as our own skills and competencies, internal organizational structure changes, and culture may require us to plan or change our internal processes to suit the needs of the customer better and to ensure high quality products, services to the customer. These internal and external factors are called context in ISO 9001. ISO 9001 requires that an organization considers all these factors while creating its strategic plans and addresses all kinds of risks and opportunities arising out of these factors to determine the scope of the quality management system, QMS, and its processes. Apart from context requirements of interested parties and product services offered by an organization shall also be considered while determining the scope of the QMS. An interested party for a small organization may include, but are not limited to, customers, regulatory or government bodies, management, employees, suppliers, etc. The requirement of a customer, for example, can be a high quality product or service and on time delivery. The scope and processes of the QMS shall be defined such that the context requirement of interested parties and types of products, services that organization offer are addressed through its QMS. Today, organizations work in a highly volatile and competitive environment. For any organization, whether big or small, it is essential to identify the contextual issues as these may lead to potential risk or an opportunity. For example, cultural and religious aspects of a region may impact how much a product or service is successful in that region. Without understanding this cultural aspect, if a product is launched in a new area, it runs the risk of low sales. So, identifying context and addressing the risks or opportunity arising out of this context through changed or enhanced processes or planning adequate and timely response to these risks is important for a company. An untimely, inadequate response to these factors may cost a company its reputation and may lead to loss of business. These contextual issues may also present opportunities such as opening up of new markets, availability of new technologies leading to reduced costs. The organization should also be prepared to capture these opportunities at the right time. Context also ensures the QMS works in conjunction with the business's strategic direction. The contextual changes over time shall also be tracked so that the QMS is always in sync with the changes in the internal and external context. With the introduction of this new clause in ISO 9001-2015 version, ISO has bridged the gap and ensured that business, context, and QMS operate together and are always synchronized. Let's now discuss what the ISO 9001 requirements are under this clause and how this can be implemented in organization. Clause 4 of ISO 9001-2015 has 4 subclauses, which are 4.1, understanding the organization and its context; 4.2, understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties; 4.3, determining the scope of the quality management system; 4.4, quality management system and its processes. Let's start with the subclause 4.1, understanding the organization and its context. The subclause 4.1 of ISO 9001-2015 states that the organization must determine external and internal issues that are relevant to its purpose and its strategic direction and that affect its ability to achieve the intended result of its quality management system. As per this subclause, the organization must monitor and review information about these external and internal issues. Subclause 4.1 says under Note 1 that issues can include positive and negative factors or conditions for consideration. Under Note 2, subclause specifies that understanding the external context can be facilitated by considering issues arising from legal, technological, competitive, market, cultural, social, and economic environments, whether international, national, regional, or local. Lastly, under Note 3, the subclause 4.1 of standard states that understanding the internal context can be facilitated by considering issues related to values, culture, knowledge, and performance of the organization. Coming to the subclause 4.2 of ISO 9001-2015, understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties. This subclause 4.2 of ISO 9001-2015 states that due to their effect or potential effect on the organization's ability to consistently provide products and services that meet customer and applicable statutory and regulatory requirements, the organization must determine the interested parties that are relevant to the quality management system. According to the Subclause 4.2, organization must determine the requirements of these interested parties that are relevant to the quality management system. Clause also states that the organization must monitor and review information about these interested parties and their relevant requirements. Let me explain this Subclause 4.2 in general. An interested party is a person or organization that can be affected by, or recognize themselves to be affected by a decision or activity that's within the scope of the management system. There will be those external interested parties that enforce specific legal, regulatory, or contractual requirements in an organization. There may also be requirements specified by internal interested parties, for example, management and staff, permanent and temporary. The Clause 4.2 of ISO 9001-2015 states that the organization must determine relevant interested parties and relevant requirements of appropriate concerned parties. Relevant interested parties to be considered are those that could affect or potentially affect the organization's ability to constantly provide products and services that meet customer and applicable statutory and regulatory requirements, monitor and review information related to the interested parties and relevant requirements. Firstly, the organization will need to define external and internal issues that are relevant to its purpose. That is, what are the relevant issues, both inside and out, that have an influence on what the organization does that would affect its capability to accomplish the intended outcomes of its management system. It should be noted that the term issue covers not only the problems which would have been the subject of the precautionary action in previous standards, but also important topics for the management system to address, such as any market, assurance, and governance goals that the organization might set for its management system. Next, the organization has to determine relevant interested parties and relevant requirements of relevant interested parties. There is no requirement in this international standard for the organization to consider interested parties which have been determined by the organization not to be relevant to its service management system. Similarly, there is no requirement to address a particular requirement of a relevant interested party if the organization considers that the requirement is not relevant. Determining what is relevant or not relevant is reliant on whether or not it has an impact on the organization's ability to provide products and services that meet customer and applicable statutory and regulatory requirements, or the organization's aim to improve consumer satisfaction. The organization can decide to determine supplementary needs and expectations that will assist it to meet its service objectives. However, it is at the organization's choice whether or not to accept additional requirements to satisfy interested parties beyond what is required by this international standard, ISO 9001-2015. The table 1 on screen explains the types of external interested parties and their possible needs and expectations. Let's talk about the Subclause 4.3, determining the scope of the quality management system. The Subclause 4.3 of ISO 9001-2015 specifies that the organization must determine the boundaries and applicability of the quality management system to establish its scope. Clause says that when determining this scope, the organization must consider the external and internal issues referred to in Subclause 4.1, the requirements of relevant interested parties referred to in Subclause 4.2, and the products and services of the organization. The organization must apply all the requirements of this international standard if they are applicable within the determined scope of its quality management system. Covering the mandatory documentation requirements, the Subclause 4.3 states that the scope of the organization's quality management system must be available and be maintained as documented information. The scope must state the types of products and services covered and provide justification for any requirement of this international standard that the organization determines is not applicable to the scope of its quality management system. Lastly, Subclause 4.3 says that the conformity to this international standard may only be claimed if the requirements determined as not being applicable do not affect the organization's ability or responsibility to ensure the conformity of its products and services and the enhancement of customer satisfaction. Coming to Subclause 4.4, Quality Management System and its processes now. This Subclause 4.4.1 of ISO 9001-2015 specifies that the organization must establish, implement, maintain, and continually improve a quality management system, including the processes needed and their interactions, in accordance with the requirements of this international standard. As per the clause, the organization must determine the processes needed for the quality management system and their application throughout the organization. This clause 4.4.1 states that the organization must determine the inputs required and the outputs expected from these processes. Organization must also determine the sequence and interaction of these processes. To meet the requirements of this standard, Subclause 4.4.1 says that organization must determine and apply the criteria and methods needed to ensure the effective operation and control of these processes. The methods to ensure the effective operation includes monitoring, measurements, and related performance indicators. According to this subclause, organization must determine the resources needed for these processes and ensure their availability, and must assign the responsibilities and authorities for these processes. Subclause 4.4.1 of ISO 9001-2015 states that the organization must address the risks and opportunities as determined in accordance with the requirements of Subclause 6.1 and must evaluate these processes and implement any changes needed to ensure that these processes achieve their intended results. Lastly, the subclause 4.4.1 states that the organization must improve their processes and the quality management system to meet the requirements of the standard. Coming to the subclause 4.4.2. This subclause 4.4.2 states that to the extent necessary, the organization must maintain documented information to support the operation of its processes and must retain documented information to have confidence that the processes are being carried out as planned. Friends, till now it was about the clause 4 of ISO 9001-2015. Now we shall discuss the next clause of the standard, that is clause 5, leadership. Leadership is a skill which involves motivating a group of individuals to work towards a common goal. In a business setting, this involves leading and guiding staff and colleagues with a strategy or a plan to meet the business needs of the company. As per ISO, leadership is defined as leadership is the person or group of people who direct and control an organization at the highest level. The top management has the power to delegate authority and provide resources within the organization. If the scope of the management system covers only part of an organization, then top management refers to those who direct and control that part of the organization. Leadership is the ability to motivate groups of people towards a common goal. It is an important skill in today's business world. Without strong leadership, many otherwise good businesses fail. ISO 9001 Clause 5 stresses on the above and the clause it's all about leadership's role in the quality management system. To put in simple words, leaders need to walk the talk to achieve the benefits of the quality management system. They need to ensure quality management system and the business processes are operating together to achieve the desired objectives and to bring in unity of purpose. This clause 5 has 3 subclauses that are 5.1 leadership and commitment, 5.2 policy, 5.3 organizational roles, responsibilities and authorities. We shall start with Subclause 5.1, Leadership and Commitment. Subclause 5.1.1, General, says that the top management must demonstrate leadership and commitment with respect to the quality management system by taking accountability for the effectiveness of the quality management system. This clause 5.1.1 specifies that top management must show leadership with respect to QMS by ensuring that the quality policy and quality objectives are established for the quality management system and are compatible with the context and strategic direction of the organization. It also stated in this subclause 5.1.1 that top management must demonstrate leadership and commitment with respect to the quality management system by ensuring the integration of the quality management system requirements into the organization's business processes. The clause 5.1.1 of ISO 9001:2015 specifies that top management must exhibit leadership and commitment with respect to QMS by promoting the use of the process approach and risk-based thinking, and by ensuring that the resources needed for the quality management system are available. As per this subclause, 5.1.1 standard says that top management must demonstrate the leadership and commitment by communicating the importance of effective quality management and of conforming to the quality management system requirements, and by ensuring that the quality management system achieves its intended results. Subclause 5.1.1 states that with respect to the quality management system, top management must determine leadership and commitment by engaging, directing, and supporting persons to contribute to the effectiveness of the quality management system. According to this clause 5.1.1, top management must determine the leadership and commitment by promoting improvement and by supporting other relevant management roles to demonstrate their leadership as it applies to their areas of responsibility. Lastly, the subclause 5.1.1 states under a note that reference to business in this international standard can be interpreted broadly to mean those activities that are core to the purposes of the organization's existence, whether the organization is public, private, for-profit, or not-for-profit. Friends, let me explain now the subclause 5.1.2, Customer Focus of ISO 9001:2015. The subclause 5.1.2 of standards specifies that top management must demonstrate leadership and commitment with respect to customer focus by ensuring that customer and applicable statutory and regulatory requirements are determined, understood, and consistently met. According to the subclause, top management must show leadership and commitment with respect to customer focus by ensuring that the risks and opportunities that can affect conformity of products and services and the ability to enhance customer satisfaction are determined and addressed. Subclause 5.1.2 further states that leadership and commitment being demonstrated by top management ensure that the focus on enhancing customer satisfaction is maintained to meet the requirements of the standard. We shall now discuss the subclause 5.2, Policy of ISO 9001:2015. The subclause 5.2.1, establishing the quality policy of the standard, states that top management is required to establish, implement, and maintain a quality policy that is appropriate to the purpose and context of the organization and supports its strategic direction. The subclause specifies that top management must establish, implement, and maintain a quality policy, that the quality policy provides a framework for setting quality objectives and includes a commitment to satisfy applicable requirements. As per this clause, 5.2.1, quality policy must include a commitment to continual improvement of the quality management system. Now coming to the subclause 5.2.2, that is communicating the quality policy. As per this subclause 5.2.2, the quality policy must be available and be maintained as documented information. The quality policy must be communicated, understood, and applied within the organization and must be available to relevant interested parties as appropriate. Let's come to the subclause 5.3, organizational roles, responsibilities, and authorities. The subclause 5.3 specifies that top management is required to ensure that the responsibilities and authorities for relevant roles are assigned, communicated, and understood within the organization. As per clause 5.3, top management must assign the responsibility and authority for ensuring that the quality management system conforms to the requirements of this international standard. Subclause 5.3 states that top management is required to assign the responsibility and authority for ensuring that the processes are delivering their intended outputs. Top management is also required to assign the responsibility and authority for reporting on the performance of the quality management system and on opportunities for improvement in particular top management. According to this subclause, organization is required to assign the responsibility and authority for ensuring the promotion of customer focus throughout the organization. Lastly, as per this clause 5.3 of ISO 9001-2015, the top management of organization is required to assign the responsibility and authority for ensuring that the integrity of the quality management system is maintained when changes to the quality management system are planned and implemented. Let's come to the clause 6, planning of the standard ISO 9001-2015. Planning is the process of conceptualizing the activities required to achieve a desired goal. It is the first and foremost activity for any new project or task that you want to accomplish. Planning involves thinking about the risks that may occur in future and addressing these through adequate control measures. Clause 6 of ISO 9001 deals with this highly critical activity and requires an organization to take a risk-based approach and plan for the uncertainties, proactively preventing undesired effects. Another aspect of planning is to identify objectives which can be used to monitor and track our progress. Additionally, this clause requires an organization to plan for changes and follow a structured approach for any changes required in the management system. Clause 6, planning brings risk-based thinking to the front. Once the organization has highlighted risks and opportunities in Clause 4, it needs to stipulate how these will be addressed through planning. The planning phase looks at what, who, how, and when these risks must be addressed. This proactive approach replaces preventative action and reduces the need for corrective actions later on. Particular focus is also placed on the objectives of the management system. These should be measurable, monitored, communicated, aligned to the policy of the management system, and updated when needed. After much deliberation, the decision to make risk explicit has been made. Here it is in Clause 6. Having highlighted the issues and requirements in Clause 4, now it is time to address the risks and opportunities the organization faces through planning. How will the organization prevent or reduce undesired effects? How will the organization ensure that it can achieve its intended outcomes and continual improvement? It will do it here in planning. Planning will address what, who, how, and when. Not difficult. This proactive approach is easier to understand than preventive action and should reduce the need for correction and corrective action at a later date. The requirements around the quality objectives have also been made more detailed. They are to be consistent with the quality policy, measurable if practicable, monitored, communicated, and updated as appropriate. They have to be established at relevant functions and levels. Clause 6 puts a greater emphasis on the organization's planning, which is integral to the business. Auditors should be familiar with the risk, the consequences of an event, and the associated likelihood of occurrence, and how to avoid, eliminate, minimize, or mitigate it. they also need to focus on the positive aspect, opportunities for the business, and how to optimize them. The risks and opportunities identified will lead to policies and objectives. Auditors should be able to identify and follow a clear path from issues and requirements through risks and opportunities, policies and objectives. Clause 6 has three subclauses, which are 6.1 Actions to address risks and opportunities, 6.2 Quality objectives and planning to achieve them, 6.3 Planning of changes. Let's start with the subclause 6.1 Actions to address risks and opportunities. The subclause 6.1.1 states that when planning for the quality management system, the organization is required to consider the issues referred to in subclause 4.1 and the requirements referred to in subclause 4.2 and determine the risks and opportunities that need to be addressed to give assurance that the quality management system can achieve its intended results. The subclause 6.1.1 specifies that when planning for the quality management system, the organization is required to determine the risks and opportunities that need to be addressed to enhance desirable effects and to prevent or reduce undesired effects. As per this subclause 6.1.1, organization must determine the risks and opportunities that need to be addressed to achieve improvement. Coming to the subclause 6.1.2, the subclause 6.1.2 of the ISO 9001 says that the organization is required to plan actions to address these risks and opportunities. The clause also specifies that organization is required to plan actions to address how to integrate and implement the actions into its quality management system processes and to evaluate the effectiveness of these actions. Quality management system processes are explained under subclause 4.4 of the standard. According to this subclause, actions taken to address risks and opportunities must be proportionate to the potential impact on the conformity of products and services. Subclause 6.1.2 under Note 1 states that options to address risks can include avoiding risk, taking risk in order to pursue an opportunity, eliminating the risk source, changing the likelihood or consequences, sharing the risk or retaining risk by informed decision. Further, under Note 2, this subclause says that opportunities can lead to the adoption of new practices, launching new products, opening new markets, addressing new customers, building partnerships, using new technology and other desirable, viable possibilities to address the organization's or its customers' needs. Let's talk about the subclause 6.2, quality objectives and planning to achieve them. The subclause 6.2.1 of the standard says that the organization is required to establish quality objectives at relevant functions, levels, and processes needed for the quality management system. As per this subclause 6.2.1, the quality objectives must be consistent with the quality policy. It must be measurable and organization must take applicable requirements into account. Subclause 6.2.1 states that quality objectives must be relevant to conformity of products and services and to enhancement of customer satisfaction. As per this clause, quality objectives must be monitored and communicated to concerned people. The organization is also required to ensure that quality objectives are updated as appropriate. Lastly, this subclause 6.2.1 states that the organization is required to maintain documented information on the quality objectives. Coming to subclause 6.2.2 now. This subclause says that when planning how to achieve its quality objectives, the organization is required to determine what will be done, what resources will be required, who will be responsible, when it will be completed, and how the results will be evaluated. Let's talk about clause 6.3, planning of changes. The subclause 6.3 of ISO 9001 states that when the organization determines the need for changes to the quality management system, the changes are required to be carried out in a planned manner. According to this subclause 6.3, the organization is required to consider the purpose of the changes and their potential consequences and the integrity of the quality management system. Clause says that organization must consider the availability of resources and the allocation or reallocation of responsibilities and authorities to meet out the requirements of the standard. Friends, we just finished discussing Clause 6 of ISO 9001-2015. Now we shall discuss Clause 7 of the standard, that is support. The Clause 7 has 5 subclauses, which are 7.1 Resources, 7.2 Competence, 7.3 Awareness, 7.4 Communication, 7.5 Documented Information. Let's start with subclause 7.1, Resources. Subclause 7.1.1 General of ISO 9001 specifies that the organization is required to determine and provide the resources needed for the establishment, implementation, maintenance, and continual improvement of the quality management system. According to this subclause, the organization is required to consider the capabilities of and constraints on existing internal resources. Organization is also required to consider what needs to be obtained from external providers to meet the objectives of the organization. Now coming to subclause 7.1.2, People. The standard through the subclause 7.1.2, People, says that the organization is required to determine and provide the persons necessary for the effective implementation of its quality management system and for the operation and control of its processes. Now let's talk about subclause 7.1.3, Infrastructure. As per the subclause 7.1.3, the organization is required to determine, provide and maintain the infrastructure necessary for the operation of its processes and to achieve conformity of products and services. It is specified under a note within subclause 7.1.2 that the infrastructure can include buildings and associated utilities, equipment including hardware and software, transportation resources, and information and communication technology. Coming to subclause 7.1.4, Environment for the operation of processes. Subclause 7.1.4 says that the organization is required to determine, provide, and maintain the environment necessary for the operation of its processes and to achieve conformity of products and services. Under a note, the standard specifies that a suitable environment can be a combination of human and physical factors, such as social, psychological, and physical. Some of the examples of social factors are non-discriminatory, calm and non-confrontational, stress-reducing, burnout, prevention, and emotionally protective, etc. falls under the psychological factors. The examples of physical factors are temperature, heat, humidity, light, airflow, hygiene, and noise. As per subclause 7.1.4, these factors can differ substantially depending on the products and services provided. Let's talk about the subclause 7.1.5. Monitoring and measuring resources. The subclause 7.1.5.1 General states that the organization is required to determine and provide the resources needed to ensure valid and reliable results when monitoring or measuring is used to verify the conformity of products and services to requirements. Standard says that the organization must ensure that the resources provided are suitable for the specific type of monitoring and measurement activities being undertaken and are also maintained to ensure their continuing fitness for their purpose. Covering the mandatory documentation requirements, the subclause 7.1.5 specifies that the organization is required to retain appropriate documented information as evidence of fitness for the purpose of monitoring and measurement of the resources. Now, coming to subclause 7.1.5.2, Measurement Traceability. This subclause 7.1.5.2 of ISO 9001:2015 specifies that when measurement traceability is a requirement or is considered by the organization to be an essential part of providing confidence in the validity of measurement results, the measuring equipment is required to be calibrated or verified, or both. As per clause, calibration must be done at specified intervals or prior to use against measurement standards traceable to international or national measurement standards when no such standards exist. Clause 7.1.5.2 further states that the basis used for calibration or verification is required to be retained as documented information. As per this clause, measuring equipment must be identified in order to determine their status and be safeguarded from adjustments, damage, or deterioration that would invalidate the calibration status and subsequent measurement results. Lastly, the clause specifies that while measuring the equipment, if the validity of previous measurement results has been adversely affected, the organization is required to determine it and, if found to be unfit for its intended purpose, organization must take appropriate action as necessary. Let's talk about subclause 7.1.6, organizational knowledge. The subclause 7.1.6 of ISO 9000:2015 says that the organization is required to determine the knowledge necessary for the operation of its processes and to achieve conformity of products and services. As per clause 7.1.6, this knowledge is required to be maintained and be made available to the extent necessary. Further, according to this subclause, when addressing the changing needs and trends, the organization must consider its current knowledge and determine how to acquire or assess any necessary additional knowledge and required updates. Standard under Note 1 within this subclause states that the organizational knowledge is knowledge specific to the organization. It is generally gained by experience. It is information that is used and shared to achieve the organization's objectives. Under Note 2, the standard ISO 9001:2015 says that organizational knowledge can be based on internal sources, example, intellectual property, knowledge gained from experience, lessons learned from failures and successful projects, capturing and sharing undocumented knowledge and experience, the results of improvements in processes, products, and services. Organizational knowledge is also based on external sources, example, standards, academia, conferences, gathering knowledge from customers or external providers. Let me talk about subclause 7.2 of ISO 9001, that is competence. According to this subclause 7.2, the organization is required to determine the necessary competence of the persons working under its control that affects the performance and effectiveness of the quality management system. Clause states that organization must ensure that these persons are competent on the basis of appropriate education, training, or experience. Subclause 7.2 specifies that an organization is required to take actions to acquire the necessary competence and evaluate the effectiveness of the actions taken wherever applicable. Lastly, the subclause 7.2 says that the organization is required to retain appropriate documented information as evidence of competence. Clause under a note mentions that applicable actions taken by the organization can include the provision of training, mentoring, or the reassignment of currently employed persons, or the hiring or contracting of competent persons. Now coming to subclause 7.3. Awareness. The subclause 7.3 awareness of ISO 9001 specifies that the organization is required to ensure that persons doing work under the organization's control are aware of the quality policy, relevant quality objectives, and their contribution to the effectiveness of the quality management system, including the benefits of improved performance. As per this subclause 7.3, the organization is also required to ensure that the persons working under the organization's control are aware of the implications of not conforming to the quality management system requirements. Now let's talk about the Subclause 7.4, Communication. The Subclause 7.4, Communication specifies that the organization is required to determine the internal and external communication relevant to the quality management system, including on what it will communicate, when to communicate, with whom to communicate, how to communicate, and who communicates. Let me explain the Subclause 7.5, Documented Information. The Subclause 7.5.1 General of ISO 9001 says that the organization's quality management system is required to include documented information required by this international standard. The quality management system is also required to include documented information determined by the organization as being necessary for the effectiveness of the quality management system. Subclause 7.5.1 under a note states that the extent of documented information for a quality management system can differ from one organization to another due to the size of the organization and its type of activities, processes, products, and services. The quality management system can also differ due to the complexity of processes and their interactions and the competence of persons. Now let me talk about the Subclause 7.5.2, Creating and Updating. Subclause 7.5.2 says that when creating and updating documented information, the organization is required to ensure appropriate identification and description. For example, a title, date, author, or reference number, etc. Organization is also required to ensure the format, for example, language, version, graphics, and media, for example, paper, electronic, while creating and updating documented information. As per this subclause, the organization must review and approve the suitability and adequacy of documented information to meet the requirements of the standard. Let's discuss subclause 7.5.3, Control of Documented Information. Subclause 7.5.3.1 states that the documented information required by the quality management system and by this international standard must be controlled to ensure that it is available and suitable for use where and when it is needed. The organization is also required to ensure that it is adequately protected, for example, from loss of confidentiality, improper use, or loss of integrity, etc. Coming to the subclause 7.5.3.2 now. This subclause specifies that for the control of documented information, the organization must address the activities like distribution, assess retrieval and use, storage and preservation, including preservation of legibility, control of changes, example version control, retention and disposition. Subclause 7.5.3.2 says that documented information of external origin determined by the organization to be necessary for the planning and operation of the quality management system must be identified as appropriate and be controlled. As per this clause, an organization must retain the documented information as evidence of conformity and must be protected from unintended alterations. Lastly, the subclause under a note states that access can imply a decision regarding the permission to view the documented information only, or the permission and authority to view and change the documented information. Friends, till now we have discussed the clause 7, support of ISO 9001-2015 Quality Management System. Now we shall discuss the clause 8, operation of ISO 9001-2015. The subclause 8 operation has further 7 subclauses that are 8.1 Operational Planning and Control, 8.2 Requirements for products and services. 8.3 Design and development of products and services. 8.4 Control of externally provided processes, products and services. 8.5 Production and service provision. 8.6 Release of products and services. 8.7 Control of non-conforming outputs. We shall now begin with the subclause 8.1, Operational Planning and Control. According to this subclause 8.1, an organization is required to plan, implement, and control the processes needed to meet the requirements for the provision of products and services, and also to implement the actions determined in Clause 6 of the standard by determining the requirements for the products and services. Clause 8.1 says that organizations must plan, implement, and control the processes needed to meet the requirements by establishing criteria for the processes and the acceptance of products and services. Standard under this subclause 8.1 states that an organization is required to plan, implement, and control the processes needed to meet the requirements by determining the resources needed to achieve conformity to the product and service requirements. Clause 8.1 also states that the organization must plan, implement, and control the processes by implementing control of the processes in accordance with the criteria to meet the requirements. Organization is required to plan, implement, and control the processes by determining, maintaining, and retaining documented information or to the extent necessary to have confidence that the processes have been carried out as planned, and also to demonstrate the conformity of products and services to their requirements. The output of this planning shall be suitable for the organization's operations. Further, the subclause 8.1 of ISO 9001:2015 specifies that the organization is required to control planned changes and review the consequences of unintended changes, taking action to mitigate and adverse effects as necessary. Lastly, this clause says that the organization is required to ensure that outsourced processes are controlled. Coming to the subclause 8.2 now. Requirements for products and services. The subclause 8.2.1 Customer Communication states that communication with customers is required to include providing information relating to the product and services and handling inquiries, contracts or orders, including changes, if any. The clause 8.2.1 specifies that communication with customers is required to obtain customer feedback relating to products and services and also the customer complaints. According to this clause, communication must include handling or controlling customers properly and establishing specific requirements for contingency actions when relevant. Let's talk about the next subclause, that is 8.2.2, determining the requirements for products and services. Subclause 8.2.2 states that when determining the requirements for the products and services to be offered to customers, the organization is required to ensure that the requirements for the products and services are defined, including any applicable statutory and regulatory requirements, and those which are considered necessary by the organization. This subclause further says that the organization is required to ensure that it can meet the claims for the products and services it offers. Now coming to clause 8.2.3, review of the requirements for products and services. The subclause 8.2.3.1 specifies that the organization is required to ensure that it has the ability to meet the requirements for products and services to be offered to customers. The organization is required to conduct a review before committing to supply products and services to a customer. The review is to include requirements specified by the customer, including the requirements for delivery and post-delivery activities. The review must include requirements not stated by the customer, but necessary for the specified or intended use when known. The subclause 8.2.3.1 says that the organization is required to conduct a review to include requirements specified by the organization, statutory and regulatory requirements applicable to the products and services, and contract or order requirements differing from those previously expressed. Coming to the subclause 8.2.3.2 now. This subclause 8.2.3.2 of ISO 9001 states that the organization is required to retain documented information as applicable on the results of the review and on any new requirements for the products and services. Let's talk about subclause 8.2.4, changes to requirements for products and services. This clause 8.2.4 specifies that the organization is required to ensure that the relevant documented information is amended and that relevant persons are made aware of the changed requirements when the requirements for products and services are changed. Coming to the clause 8.3, design and development of products and services now. The subclause 8.3.1 general states that the organization is required to establish, implement and maintain a design and development process that is appropriate to ensure the subsequent provision of products and services. Let us discuss the subclause 8.3.2, design and development planning. Subclause 8.3.2 of ISO 9001-2015 states that in determining the stages and controls for design and development, the organization is required to consider the nature, duration and complexity of the design and development activities, the required process stages including applicable design and development reviews, the required design and development verification and validation activities, the responsibilities and authorities involved in the design and development process, the internal and external resource needs for the design and development of products and services, the need to control interfaces between persons involved in the design and development process, the need for involvement of customers and users in the design and development process, the requirements for subsequent provision of products and services, the level of control expected for the design and development process by customers and other relevant interested parties, and the documented information needed to demonstrate that design and development requirements have been met. Let's talk about 8.3.3, design and development inputs. This subclause says that the organization must determine the requirements essential for the specific type of products and services to be designed and developed. The organization is required to consider functional and performance requirements, information derived from previous similar design and development activities, statutory and regulatory requirements, standards or codes of practice that the organization has committed to implement, potential consequences of failure due to the nature of the products and services. As per this subclause 8.3.3, inputs must be adequate for design and development purposes. It must be complete and unambiguous. The conflicting design and development inputs must be resolved. Subclause 8.3.3, covering the mandatory documentation requirements, says that the organization is required to retain documented information on design and development inputs. Coming to subclause 8.3.4 now, design and development controls. This subclause 8.3.4 of ISO 9001 specifies that the organization is required to apply controls to the design and development process to ensure that the results to be achieved are defined, reviews are conducted to evaluate the ability of the results of design and development to meet requirements. Verification activities are conducted to ensure that the design and development outputs meet the input requirements. Validation activities are conducted to ensure that the resulting products and services meet the requirements for the specified application or intended use. Any necessary actions are taken on problems determined during the reviews or verification and validation activities. Documented information of these activities is retained. Lastly, under a note, Subclause 8.3.4 states that design and development reviews, verification, and validation have distinct purposes. They can be conducted separately or in any combination as is suitable for the products and services of the organization. Let me talk about Subclause 8.3.5 now. Design and development outputs. As per this subclause, the organization is required to ensure that design and development outputs meet the input requirements, are adequate for the subsequent processes for the provision of products and services, include or reference monitoring and measuring requirements as appropriate and acceptance criteria. Specify the characteristics of the products and services that are essential for their intended purpose and their safe and proper provision. Finally, this subclause 8.3.5 states that the organization is required to retain documented information on design and development outputs for meeting the requirements of the standard. Coming to subclause 8.3.6, design and development changes. According to this subclause 8.3.6 of ISO 9001, the organization is required to identify, review, and control changes made during or subsequent to the design and development of products and services, to the extent necessary to ensure that there is no adverse impact on conformity to requirements. This clause says that the organization is required to retain documented information on design and development changes and the results of reviews, the authorization of the changes, and the actions taken to prevent adverse impacts. Now let's talk about the clause 8.4, control of externally provided processes, products, and services. Let me explain the subclause 8.4.1 general. According to this subclause, the organization is required to ensure that externally provided processes, products, and services conform to requirements. Clause 8.4.1 states that the organization is required to determine the controls to be applied to externally provided processes, products, and services when products and services from external providers are intended for incorporation into the organization's own products and services. This subclause 8.4.1 states that the organization is required to determine the controls to be applied to externally provided processes, products, and services when products and services are provided directly to the customer by external providers on behalf of the organization. The subclause also specifies that the organization is required to determine the controls to be applied to externally provided processes, products, and services when a process or part of a process is provided by an external provider as a result of a decision by the organization. The standard through this subclause 8.4.1 specifies that the organization is required to determine and apply criteria for the evaluation, selection, monitoring of performance, and re-evaluation of external providers based on their ability to provide processes or products and services in accordance with the requirements. Lastly, this subclause talks about the mandatory documentation requirements. The clause says that the organization is required to retain documented information of these activities and any necessary actions arising from the evaluations. Now coming to subclause 8.4.2, type and extent of control. This subclause 8.4.2 states that the organization is required to ensure that externally provided processes, products, and services do not adversely affect the organization's ability to consistently deliver conforming products and services to its customers. According to this clause, the organization must ensure that externally provided processes remain within the control of its quality management system. Subclause 8.4.2 states that the organization must define both the controls and it intends to apply on an external provider and those it intends to apply to the resulting output. According to this subclause, the organization must take into consideration the potential impact of the externally provided processes, products, and services on the organization's ability to consistently meet customer and applicable statutory and regulatory requirements. As per Clause 8.4.2, organizations must consider the effectiveness of the controls applied by the external provider. Clause says that the organization must determine the verification or other activities necessary to ensure that the externally provided processes, products, and services meet the requirements. Let's discuss the subclause 8.4.3. Information for external providers. This subclause specifies that the organization is required to ensure the adequacy of requirements prior to their communication to the external provider. The organization must communicate to external providers its requirements for the processes, products, and services to be provided. As per this subclause, an organization is required to ensure the adequacy of requirements prior to their communication to the external provider for the approval of products and services, methods, processes, and equipment, and the release of products and services. Subclause 8.4.3 of ISO 9001 says that the organization is required to ensure the competence, including any required qualification of persons and the external providers' interactions with the organization. As per this subclause 8.4.3, the organization is required to ensure that control and monitoring of the external provider's performance is to be applied by the organization. According to this subclause, organization is required for verification or validation activities that the organization or its customers intend to perform at the external provider's premises. Let's talk about subclause 8.5. Production and service provision. The subclause 8.5.1, control of production and service provision, states that the organization is required to implement production and service provision under controlled conditions. Controlled conditions are required to include, as applicable, the availability of documented information that defines the characteristics of the products to be produced, the services to be provided, or the activities to be performed. Controlled conditions are also required to include the results to be achieved. Subclause 8.5.1 specifies that the organization must include the availability and use of suitable monitoring and measuring resources in controlled conditions. The organization is required to ensure that controlled conditions include the implementation of monitoring and measurement activities at appropriate stages to verify that criteria for control of processes or outputs and acceptance criteria for products and services have been met. This subclause 8.5.1 states that the controlled conditions must comprise the use of suitable infrastructure and environment for the operation of processes. The conditions must include the appointment of competent persons, including any required qualification. Organization must ensure that controlled conditions include the validation and periodic revalidation of the ability to achieve planned results of the processes for production and service provision, where the resulting output cannot be verified by subsequent monitoring or measurement. Subclause 8.5.1 specifies that controlled conditions are required to contain the implementation of actions to prevent human error and also the implementation of release, delivery, and post-delivery activities. Coming to subclause 8.5.2, identification and traceability. According to subclause 8.5.2 of ISO 9001, the organization is required to use suitable means to identify outputs when it is necessary to ensure the conformity of products and services. To meet the requirement of the standard 9001, this subclause says that the organization is required to identify the status of outputs with respect to monitoring and measurement requirements throughout production and service provision. Subclause 8.5.2 states that the organization is required to control the unique identification of the outputs when traceability is a requirement and shall retain the documented information necessary to enable traceability. Now let's talk about clause 8.5.3. The subclause 8.5.3 of ISO 9001 specifies that the organization is required to exercise care with property belonging to customers or external providers while it is under the organization's control or being used by the organization. As per this subclause, the organization is required to identify, verify, protect, and safeguard customers or external providers' property provided for use or incorporation into the products and services. Subclause 8.5.3 states that when the property of a customer or external provider is lost, damaged, or otherwise found to be unsuitable for use, the organization is required to report this to the customer or external provider and retain documented information on what has occurred. Within this subclause 8.5.3, it is also specified under a note that property of a customer or external provider can include materials, components, tools and equipment, premises, intellectual property, and personal data. Now, coming to subclause 8.5.4, preservation. As per this subclause 8.4, the organization is required to preserve the outputs during production and service provision to the extent necessary to ensure conformity to requirements. The subclause 8.4 says, under a note, that preservation can include identification, handling, contamination control, packaging, storage, transmission or transportation, and protection. Now let's talk about the subclause 8.5.5, post-delivery activities. This subclause 8.5.5 of the standard states that the organization is required to meet requirements for post-delivery activities associated with the products and services. In determining the extent of post-delivery activities that are required, the organization is required to consider statutory and regulatory requirements, the potential undesired consequences associated with its products and services, the nature, use, and intended lifetime of its products and services, customer requirements, customer feedback. Lastly, this subclause 8.5.5 says, under a note, that post-delivery activities can include actions under warranty provisions, contractual obligations such as maintenance services, and supplementary services such as recycling or final disposal. Coming to the next subclause 8.5.6, control of changes. The subclause 8.5.6, control of changes, states that the organization is required to review and control changes for production or service provision to the extent necessary to ensure continuing conformity with requirements. Clause further says that the organization is required to retain documented information describing the results of the review of changes, the person or persons authorizing the change, and any necessary actions arising from the review. Let's discuss the subclause 8.6. Release of products and services. The subclause 8.6 of ISO 9001 specifies that the organization shall implement planned arrangements at appropriate stages to verify that the product and service requirements have been met. As per this subclause, the release of products and services to the customer is required not to proceed until the planned arrangements have been satisfactorily completed by the customer or unless otherwise approved by a relevant authority and as applicable. The subclause further states that the organization is required to retain documented information on the release of products and services. The documented information must include evidence of conformity with the acceptance criteria and the traceability of the persons authorizing the release. Coming to subclause 8.7, control of non-conforming outputs. The subclause 8.7.1 of ISO 9001-2015 specifies that the organization is required to ensure that the outputs that do not conform to their requirements are identified and controlled to prevent their unintended use or delivery. As per the clause, the organization is required to take appropriate action based on the nature of the non-conformity and its effect on the conformity of products and services. This must also apply to the non-conforming products and services detected after delivery of products, during or after the provision of services. Subclause 8.7 says that the organization is required to deal with non-conforming outputs in one or more of the ways like correction, segregation containment, return or suspension of provision of products and services, informing the customer, and obtaining authorization for acceptance under concession. Standard through this subclause states that conformity to the requirements is required to be verified when non-conforming outputs are corrected. Now, the subclause 8.7.2 states that the organization is required to retain documented information that describes the non-conformity, the actions taken, any concessions obtained, and identifies the authority deciding the action in respect of the non-conformity. Friends, I have explained the clause 8, operation of ISO 9001-2015. Now we shall discuss the clause 9, performance evaluation of the standard. Clause 9 has three subclauses. Subclause 9.1, monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation. Subclause 9.2, internal audit. Subclause 9.3, management review. Let me begin with clause 9.1, monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation. The subclause 9.1.1, general, states that the organization is required to determine what needs to be monitored and measured along with the methods for monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation needed to ensure valid results. Clause 9.1.1 says that the organization is required to determine when the monitoring and measuring shall be performed and when the results from monitoring and measurement shall be analyzed and evaluated. As per this subclause, the organization is required to evaluate the performance and the effectiveness of the quality management system. The organization is also required to retain appropriate documented information as evidence of the results. Let's talk about subclause 9.1.2, customer satisfaction. According to this subclause, the organization is required to monitor customers' perceptions of the degree to which their needs and expectations have been fulfilled. The organization is also required to determine the methods for obtaining, monitoring, and reviewing this information. Subclause 9.1.2, customer satisfaction says under a note within the standard that examples of monitoring customer perceptions can include customer surveys, customer feedback on delivered products and services, and meetings with customers. This can also include market share analysis, compliments, warranty claims, and dealer reports as well. Coming to subclause 9.1.3, analysis and evaluation of ISO 9001-2015. According to this subclause, the organization is required to analyze and evaluate appropriate data and information arising from monitoring and measurement. This clause further states that the results of analysis is required to be used to evaluate conformity of products and services, the degree of customer satisfaction, the performance and effectiveness of the quality management system, if planning has been implemented effectively, the effectiveness of actions taken to address risks and opportunities, the performance of external providers, the need for improvements to the quality management system. Clause 9.1.3 under a note says that methods to analyze data can include statistical techniques. Let me now talk about clause 9.2, internal audit. Subclause 9.2.1 of the standard states that the organization is required to conduct internal audits at planned intervals to provide information on whether the quality management system conforms to the organization's own requirements for its quality management system and the requirements of this international standard. This clause specifies that the organization is required to ensure that the internal audit is effectively implemented and maintained to meet the requirements of the standard. Now, the subclause 9.2.2 states that the organization is required to plan, establish, implement, and maintain an audit program, including the frequency, methods, responsibilities, planning requirements, and reporting, which shall take into consideration the importance of the processes concerned, changes affecting the organization, and the results of previous audits. As per this subclause 9.2.2, organizations must define the audit criteria and scope for each audit to meet the requirements of the standard. Subclause 9.2.2 states that an organization is required to select auditors and conduct audits to ensure objectivity and the impartiality of the audit process. Organizations must ensure that the results of the audits are reported to relevant management. As per this subclause 9.2.2, the organization is required to take appropriate correction and corrective actions without undue delay to meet the requirements. Lastly, this subclause specifies that the organization is required to retain documented information as evidence of the implementation of the audit program and the audit results. It is also recommended that this clause under a note to refer to ISO 19011 for further guidance. Let's talk about clause 9.3, management review. The subclause 9.3.1 general states that the top management is required to review the quality management system of the organization at planned intervals to ensure its continuing suitability, adequacy, effectiveness, and alignment with the strategic direction of the organization. Coming to subclause 9.3.2, management review inputs. This clause states that the management review is required to be planned and carried out, taking into consideration the status of actions from previous management reviews and changes in external and internal issues that are relevant to the quality management system. As per this subclause 9.3.2, the management review is required to be planned and carried out, taking into consideration the information on the performance and effectiveness of the quality management system, including trends, as in customer satisfaction and feedback from relevant interested parties, the extent to which quality objectives have been met, process performance and conformity of products and services, non-conformities and corrective actions, monitoring and measurement results, audit results, and the performance of external providers. The management review is also required to be planned and carried out, taking into consideration the adequacy of resources, the effectiveness of actions taken to address risks and opportunities, and the opportunities for improvement. Now let's talk about subclause 9.3.3, management review outputs. The subclause 9.3.3 specifies that the output of the management review is required to include decisions and actions related to opportunities for improvement, any need for changes to the quality management system, and resource needs. As per this subclause, the organization is required to retain documented information as evidence of the results of management reviews. Friends, we have discussed Clause 9, Performance Evaluation of ISO 9001-2015. Now let's move forward to the last clause of this standard, ISO 9001-2015, that is, Improvement. This Clause 10 of the standard has three subclauses. Subclause 10.1, General, Subclause 10.2, Non-Conformity and Corrective Action, Subclause 10.3, Continual Improvement. Let's start with Subclause 10.1 General. The Subclause 10.1 of the standard states that the organization is required to determine and select opportunities for improvement and implement any necessary actions to meet customer requirements and enhance customer satisfaction. These must include improving products and services to meet requirements as well as to address future needs and expectations. This clause says that it must contain correcting, preventing, or reducing undesired effects and improving the performance and effectiveness of the quality management system. As per Subclause 10.1, examples of improvement can include correction, corrective action, continual improvement, breakthrough change, innovation, and reorganization. Now coming to Clause 10.2. Non-conformity and corrective action. As per this subclause, the organization is required to evaluate the need for action to eliminate the causes of the non-conformity in order that it does not recur or occur elsewhere by reviewing and analyzing the non-conformity, determining the causes of the non-conformity, and determining if similar non-conformities exist or could potentially occur. This clause says that an organization is required to implement any action needed and review the effectiveness of any corrective action taken to meet the requirement of the standard. The standard through this subclause 10.2.1 states that the organization is required to update risks and opportunities determined during planning, if necessary. Organizations can make changes to the quality management system if necessary. Further, the clause says that corrective actions taken by the organization must be appropriate to the effects of the non-conformities encountered. According to the subclause 10.2.2, the organization is required to retain documented information as evidence of the nature of the non-conformities and any subsequent actions taken. The organization is also required to retain documented information as evidence of the results of any corrective action. Coming to the last subclause of this standard, 9001-2015, that is subclause 10.3, Continual Improvement. This subclause 10.3, Continual Improvement, states that the organization is required to continually improve the suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the quality management system. The organization is required to consider the results of analysis and evaluation and the outputs from management review to determine if there are needs or opportunities that must be addressed as part of continual improvement. We just discussed all about Clause 10, Improvement. Now, you can see here Table A1 on screen, which contains the major differences in terminology between ISO 9001-2008 and ISO 9001-2015. Now you can see here on screen Table B1, containing the relationship between other international standards on quality management and quality management systems and the clauses of this international standard. Now we have reached the end of the session. I hope that you have an idea about ISO 9001-2015 Quality Management System, or QMS in short. I sincerely thank you all for your interest and attention. Thank you and best wishes.